Chapter 1. Redlock, a tiny village in the Duchy of Seaborn, Nesland, on the border of Sabor's Land. Redlock is far enough from the goblin border that attacks are uncommon. I relocated there late in my 2nd century to care for my aged Uncle Carl in his convalescence. Mostly populated by humans and other giant barbarian species, my family and I are the only gnomes in the area. From Dr. Unfriendly's comprehensive guide to everything. Shiv gracefully strode into his latest small village, leading his pack mule Cornelius by the halter. Shiv's violently bright clothes and bulky mustache clashed loudly with the poorly concealed leather armor underneath. His prematurely white hair, the lyre slung over one shoulder, and the conspicuous lack of weapons. Unarmed lone travelers did not wander alone outside towns much these days, and he drew every eye as he strutted like a rooster through the hamlet's main gate, actually just a gap in the large wooden wall. Redlock was a frontier town, the sort he liked best, away from contested borders but not from wilderness, not too many soldiers but not too soft either. The one soldier who had been sitting with his back to the logs of the town wall leapt to his feet, first looking to make sure his captain had not seen him dozing in the sun, and second to question the newcomer. "Hey, you there! You're supposed to check in with the guard, you know," he called as he approached, rattling his slightly rusty sword in the scabbard and attempting to look official. "Name and business." Shiv made an elaborate bow, sweeping his outer cloak around grandly. Many of the people from across the wilderness wore several cloaks as he did, but in Nesland it was an uncommon practice. His other hand swept the narrow-brimmed red hat off to the side and then flicked it up in the air to land neatly on his head as he stood up. "Shiv at your especially humble service, General. I am a travelling performer, and therefore my business is travelling in order to perform. Would there be a place of rest available for hire for a man of simple means nearby?" "What?" "An inn, tavern, bar, or trough, not too dependent on large amounts of coin, perchance." "Oh," replied the guard, adjusting his stance to appear more official. You're looking for the Tortoise Toe Inn, then?" "Ah, precisely, Professor." Shiv smiled broadly and briefly scratched his huge white mustache. "A place to hang my hat under your useful vigilance. The direction thereto would be—" said the guard, looking round uncertainly. "Center of town, second biggest building?" "Excellent, my most informative sir. And this road is the main thoroughfare proceeding in an appropriate direction thereto?" Yes." "Astounding, my lord. Your canny awareness does your town credit. Then I will take your leave, Eminence, and proceed accordingly. Farewell and good day to you." Shiv bowed again and swaggered off along the cobblestones, nodding his head or tipping his hat to every passer-by with a grin. The soldier stared after him for a moment, uncertain as to whether he had been complimented or insulted. Then, shrugging, he strolled back to his spot by the gate. Shiv had to walk only a few minutes to get to the center of town. Past the circumference of the wall, around 24 single-story wooden cottages, squatted beside subsistence gardens and orchards, and small pens held chickens or sheep, even a few cattle. An ugly black stone well stood in the center in the small town square, and standing out from the cottages was a 3-story stone manor house and a 2-story converted barn. A double door had been cut in the side of the barn, facing the road, and a sign bore a picture of a turtle with one large claw on its right foreleg. Apparently, the upper half had also been heavily reworked, as a wooden balcony surrounded the 2nd floor, and there were several doors and blurry glass windows which led out onto it. He quickly tied Cornelius to a post outside, and lifted the bulky saddlebags off. Slinging the baggage over the shoulder opposite his lyre, he patted the animal's yellow-brown flank and strutted through the entrance. 3 or 4 tables were jammed tight across the dusty main room, and a large bar and stone fireplace were on the far side. Slightly dimmed light leaked in through poorly made glass window panes, barely transparent. This light was supplemented by a few fat candles on each table. There were maybe a dozen patrons sipping drinks from clay mugs, and they all eyed him warily, through a sudden pause in the conversation. He strutted over to the main bar, smiling broadly at the woman behind him. She was bordering on middle-aged, but well-preserved, and wearing a long black dress, which was far too expensive for such a place. He dropped the baggage at the foot of a bar stool, and bowed deeply, flourishing his hat and sweeping his cloaks back. "Good day, milady. I was wondering if I could purchase one of your fine elixirs to ease the dust from my weary throat. Do you have any exceptional wine?" "No," the woman said, smiling except from her eyes. She brushed some of her dark red-brown hair from her eyes and glanced over his shoulder at some of the patrons. "We have some passable wine. Our specialty is the house ale, but it is quite good." "Then house ale would be perfection itself. Thank you." Shiv smiled broadly again, and did not twitch as he heard a few chairs push back and some heavy, booted footsteps. He pulled a silver founding out of nowhere and placed it on its edge on the bar top. The coin rolled slowly across the bar and into the hand of the barkeep. "Ahem," came a voice from behind him. Shiv turned to lean back against the bar on his elbows. There were 4 fairly large men standing behind him, frowning. The one who had spoken stood in front of the others, a half-shaven man with his cloak thrown back to reveal enough black, lacquered plate armor to nearly collapse whatever chair he'd been sitting on. At the right hand of the speaker stood the largest of them, dressed in layers of smelly bearskins. He towered over most men by 2 full heads and outweighed most men 3 times over with his muscle alone. He had also had a single canine tooth that was long and pointed, as if he was part goblin or troll, jutting out over his upper lip. On the other side was a slender man in green who looked as if he could blow away in a stiff breeze, doubtless because of elven blood. And on the other side of the half-elf, perhaps strangest of all, was a man with his hair slicked back, bloody red eyes, and long black fingernails that stroked a rapier at his side like it was a beloved pet. All of them had similar reddish hair and mean, narrowed eyes. "Mother, is this fop annoying you?" said the one with the rapier. "Now, boys, you can't do this with every traveller that comes into town or we'll go out of business," said the barkeep. "You'll have to forgive my boys, they're a little overprotective of my sister and me, or of their sister and me, but still, be sure to cause no trouble while you're here." She had finished pouring his ale into a large clay mug and placed it on the bar alongside the 5 copper ticks left over from his silver. Shiv took a sip in the moment of awkward silence. "Milady, mischief had not, until it was mentioned, entered my thoughts in the slightest." He took another sip. "The ale is quite good, thank you, and you may keep the coppers as a joyously surrendered gratuity." The woman scooped up the coins and turned to the cash box. Shiv turned on his bar stool to face the 4 men casually. Despite their threatening manner, he appeared not to notice, and had another sip, pausing afterwards to lick the foam from his mustache. "So, you 4 are brothers, then?" "Half-brothers, actually," said the thin one tersely. Shiv slightly rose one eyebrow and rummaged through his pockets for a small wooden pipe. The 4 waited expectantly for him to say something. He did not, instead busily thumbing a pinch of tobacco into the pipe. "And the one over there's your half-sister, then?" he said, once his pipe was full, nodding towards their table, where a statuesque red-headed woman sat watching the exchange. The big one with the big tooth stepped forward and leaned closer to his face. "What's that supposed to mean? You saying something about me mum?" he growled. Suddenly his eyes widened and he stepped back from Shiv quickly. Somehow Shiv had clenched the unlit pipe in his teeth, drawn a long shining dagger from out of nowhere, and put it to the huge man's throat before anyone had seen him move. The point had not drawn blood, but it was only a hair's breadth from it. "Hey, just asking," the hairy man shouted. "Didn't mean nothing." The 3 remaining brothers drew swords. The black-armored one a huge broadsword, and the others rapiers. The sister drew 2 short swords as well, and walked over, and soon Shiv was easily surrounded. He smiled widely, and looked slowly around the room as if studying it. "Let Thock go, traveller, or you'll be dead before all the pieces hit the ground," the red-eyed one said, with the confidence to make it believable. Suddenly, Shiv's unlit pipe shot a flame 3 feet in the air with a bang, and smoke burst out of it into a cloud, blinding the brothers. There were mutters of surprise, and a few shouts, and a series of 4 rapid knocking sounds. In a few seconds the smoke cleared, and Shiv was standing on the bar, with a long ivory knife in each hand poised to throw, the half-full mug between his feet. The brothers surged forward briefly and then stopped, all looking down at the same time. Each of them, except for the sister, had a long black-bladed dagger sprouting from the toe of one boot. "Don't make me throw these things," Shiv shouted. "These ones are rather heavily enchanted, and I'm not sure you won't be injured." The sister stepped forward and stopped as a flick of Shiv's wrist sent one of the white-bladed knives into the floor at her feet. With a crunching sound, a circle of thick white ice flashed out from the point of impact, instantly freezing a circle about half a pace across. The woman jumped back with her eyes wide. The 5 of them looked up at him, and several seconds passed in silence. "Lady, don't sneak up on me. I hate that," Shiv said, shifting his footing slightly, and everyone realized the barkeep was standing behind him with a drawn dagger of her own. After another few moments, 5 swords and 1 dagger were lowered, and the daggers in Shiv's hand whirled briefly and disappeared. He pointed at each of the daggers in the floor, and flashing yellow, they one by one leapt into his waiting left hand, while he juggled the others single-handedly in his right. When he had all 5 errant knives, he tossed them up into the air and danced a little jig, with each step catching another knife in a fold of his cloak, a sleeve, or a boot before it disappeared entirely. Then, without pausing, he leapt off the bar, landed squarely on the bar stool, snatched up his mug, and drained it. "Another quaff, please, milady, for my weary throat still aches with the dust of the merciless road," he said with a smile, and slid the empty mug back across the bar. The various patrons in the bar who weren't holding weapons suddenly began clapping and laughing. The shortest of them, a tiny man in a blue mantle and robe, whistled approvingly. Thank you, Shiv said over the din. "Your discerning eyes and ears have gladdened my troubled and weary heart. Let it be known that 7 days hence a great show will take place, a show which will make this mere episode seem pale and everyday by comparison. In 1 week I will give you Shiv's Magic Circus." The patrons' shouts of appreciation and applause rose until Shiv could no longer make himself heard. Around him, the 4 brothers and 2 women stood in stunned disbelief as Shiv smiled and waved. Yes, this was indeed the sort of town he liked best.